Bread is not just food, it is power. 1 million Romans ate each day from grain grown a sea away, seized from the provinces, shipped, counted, and handed out by name. Control that flow, and you controlled Rome. Break one link, a failed harvest, a closed winter sea, and the greatest city on earth is a month from hunger. It came down to a name on a list. Somewhere in Rome, on an ordinary morning in the 2nd century, a man joined a queue. He carried a small lead token, his name in effect pressed into metal, and when he reached the front, he handed it over and received grain. 5 modi. A fixed measure, the same as last month, the same as next month. His by right of registration, not by need. Nothing about that transaction looked like the movement of hundreds of thousands of metric tons of cargo across open sea. But it was the last step of exactly that. The question is not whether Rome had a grain supply. It did. The question is how far that supply can be understood as a genuine state-managed chain, with a supervising office, contracted shippers, administered ports, warehouses, and a registered distribution list. The answer turns on a distinction. The Dole was not the food supply. This episode addresses city-scale Rome, not empire-scale Rome, anchored in the 1st through 3rd centuries CE. By that period, the apparatus had a name, the Annona, and a permanent institutional shape. Augustus had established the Praefectus Annonae, a senior equestrian official to hold oversight authority across the entire supply operation. The system rested on 3 documented pillars: tax-in-kind extraction from Egypt and North Africa, state-contracted maritime shipping, and a logistics chain terminating at Rome's river port. The man with the lead token, his Tessera Frumentaria, was a registered adult male citizen resident in the city. On his assigned day, at a distribution portico, the token verified his place on the list. He received his 5 modi and left. The mechanics of that exchange are reasonably well documented. Where exactly he collected it is less certain. Distribution likely centered on sites like the Porticus Minutia, or spread across several points in the city. The monthly measure itself is not in dispute. What fed that moment was a chain of dependencies, each under real pressure. Egyptian and African harvests were collected as tax in kind. Extraction, not purchase. That grain was loaded onto deep-hulled freighters by Navicularii, private merchant shippers under state contract, who sailed it across the Mediterranean to Ostia and the purpose-built harbour at Portus. There it transferred to flat-bottom river barges and moved up the Tiber to Rome, entering the Heraea, warehouse complexes that held the city's buffer against the next season. Loading and unloading that cargo, sack by sack, amphora by amphora, at Ostia, at Portus, and again at the Heraea, was physical labor performed substantially by enslaved dock workers and porters. A defined portion of what arrived moved through the Frumentatio to registered recipients. Each link in that chain is documented. Consider the disproportion. Every other major city of the ancient world drew its bread grain from farmland, reachable in a day or two by ox cart, a radius of perhaps 30 to 50 kilometers. Rome's bread depended on harvests grown hundreds of sea miles away, across a Mediterranean effectively unsaleable in winter, mediated entirely by state office and contracted shipper. Scholars put Rome's total annual grain consumption during the High Empire somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 metric tons, a range worked backwards from a population of roughly 1 million. But even at the lower end, the gap between what Rome's own hinterland could supply and what the city required was not a marginal shortfall. It was the entire supply. An ordinary Roman's daily bread hung on a Nile flood and a sailing season he would never see. Return to the man walking away from the portico with his sack. He is one documented stream. His wife is not on the register. His children are not on the register. And beyond his household, the vast majority of Rome's population held no place on the register at all. Dole recipients under Augustus numbered perhaps 150,000 to 200,000, a fraction of a city that may have held close to 1 million people. The commercial grain market, private traders and supply chains the state did not administer, fed everyone the list excluded. That system is far less documented than the Frumentatio, and the precise division between what the state managed and what the market supplied remains genuinely debated. The institutional skeleton of the Annona is known. The Praefectus Annonae, the Navicularii contracts, the Horea, the Tessera verified Frumentatio. The Dole's recipient category and monthly measure are documented. What remains actively debated is the share of total food supply the state-managed Dole actually covered versus the commercial market, and how centrally directed the wider chain really was, as opposed to contractor-driven with state oversight at the edges. No ancient source gives a complete account of how the commercial grain market worked alongside the Annona, or how the two systems interacted when one came under pressure. The Annona did not feed 1 million people equally. It guaranteed a measured ration to a named list, while a wider, less documented supply chain fed the rest. That is where the evidence runs out, not where the system did. Rome converted conquest into administered entitlement, and administered entitlement into daily bread. For some, food required a city. A city this dense required a second machine, water, moving continuously, invisibly by gravity.